Is that connection like you made a deal in the hospital?
That's right. I made a wholesale deal in the hospital.
Yeah. Kind of curious, like how just you did some professional video game stuff for a little while. So I'm just kind of curious what got you started.
Yeah, I could totally see my 15-year-old watching you on YouTube being like, I know this guy,
Yeah. Well, cool, man. Let's kind of just start off like, how'd you get started in business, right?
I'd get home to my wife and I'd be like, babe, they want to pay me $500. We're going to be rich. Just for context, I ended up my last wedding photographing for $13,000. And then after that, I spent like the next 6 or 7 months head down, learning everything there is to know about real estate wholesaling, building out SOPs, putting all those in place to begin to scale once we started getting our first couple of deals. And so I would say in 2022, like July, August, started diving into foreclosures. And then from there, that's when we were really like blew up.
So were the majority of your 70 all FSBOs?
Every single one of them.
Wow.
That's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, that is crazy.
I knew real estate is like the generational wealth aspect that I wanted to pursue. I believe so strongly in this that I'm just going to put my head down. I'm going to learn everything I can.
So one thing that I know you for, and I've seen you kind of do over the last year, is a different way of wholesaling, right? Call it the installment method. I'm still learning about this a little bit more myself, but because it's something so new that's kind of out there, I know like the CG community knows about it pretty heavily at this point. But what exactly is the installment method and why did you guys kind of start building that?
Yeah, this is cool, man. So I actually didn't learn about it until I went to CG, and there's these guys down in South Carolina, and they are bigger wholesalers in South Carolina. They do a lot of deals. They actually also have a SaaS company, I think, and they were doing some stuff with hedge funds as well. But they were down in South Carolina, and we ran into each other at a dinner in CG, and they were asking me about what I do. And then I was like, oh, I wholesale in South Carolina. And they're like, really? And I said, yeah. And they were like, you know that they just passed legislation that essentially makes wholesaling in South Carolina illegal. And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, we work with one of the 9 real estate commissioners in South Carolina. He's also a huge closing attorney. And they started their day. And in the beginning of that day, you could wholesale totally fine. They went into a meeting and 15 minutes later, they had essentially outlawed wholesaling in South Carolina. And so really, and this is the thing that really got me was like, I've got a family, right? Like I've got a family, I got kids. And in 15 minutes, the lives of people were changed because the way that they did something and ran their business was no longer allowed because 9 people decided that you're no longer allowed to do that in that state. And so I was like, holy smokes. Okay, like I don't like that. How do we mitigate that risk? Because South Carolina is a great state to do a lot of this stuff in as far as if you want to hold property, then you've got great rental opportunity for cash flow, but then it's also, you got cities like Charleston, Columbia, Greenville that are really up and coming that people definitely want to wholesale in. And so I saw 2 things. One, I saw, okay, there's a risk that I want to mitigate, but also there's an opportunity that I want to take advantage of, because then if most people can't do, or if like people are literally getting cease and desist letters in the mail because they're wholesaling and getting fined $20K an assignment, it was like, okay, so then if that's the case, that means that there's going to be a whole lot less competition in that state. So what does it look like for me to then take advantage of whatever? So they were telling me about this thing that they got together with that attorney who is actually one of the 9, and they created this thing called the installment method. Now, for context, installment sales have been around since the 1800s. Very typical because like when you think about it, it's essentially like a land contract. That's how they didn't have banks back in the 1800s that were lending people $20,000 to buy a piece of land. Like they were creating installment contracts or land contracts with people to sell their land in the middle of the country nowhere in the United States. And so then it became really popular again during redlining. So in the 60s and the 70s, when minorities couldn't apply and get approved for a lot of these loans with the banks, they would create installment contracts with these sellers. And then it became extremely predatory towards buyers. So these buyers, if they would miss a payment, would get foreclosed on like immediately. And so then a whole bunch of legislation, very interesting, came out to protect buyers in these cases. So you've got a ton of case law in every single state of legislation created to protect buyers on installment sales, which is very interesting because most everything protects the sellers in these cases, but installment contracts protect buyers. And then like they were used up until the 90s, and then like then all of a sudden, nobody used them anymore. For like 20 years, nobody used them ever. So you don't really hear about installment sales unless you meet an attorney that was doing them in the 90s, because for 20 years, they just stopped. And so older attorneys know about them. Oh, yeah, no, we used to do that all the time. And so then what happened was these guys, Jordan, Alex, and then this guy, Gary Pickering, they essentially contextualized installment context to the current time. And so then I was like, I'm going to start doing those. So I started doing a bunch of those. And they're actually all we do, because imagine, I was doing novations before, and I know you probably have talked about novations on here.
Yeah.
was doing novations, but then we'd run into the issue where like I'd go, hey, seller, you're going to see that I'm going to make $100,000 on this deal. Please sign, please. Like, please, please, when you see that. And so like you run into that issue with novations. You also run with the other issues, but like this is not me being like, oh, I think they're all still like tools in the tool belt. Novations still have their context in which they're going to be good at. Sub twos have good context. This has a good context. And so, or certain situations that those would be good at. Then after that, I just decided doing them. And essentially what it is I will go to a seller and, we give our cash offer. And if they're like, oh, I don't want that. Okay, well, then I think you may be able to do our installment program where we can then offer them more money or whatever. But we actually do an initial closing where I'd say, hey, Justin, what if I were to give you this amount and then also give you $500 now? Would that be helpful? And you're like, yeah, heck yeah, it'd be helpful for me to get that $500 now. Yeah. Then what we do is we do within the first 5, 7, 10 days, however long it takes your title company to clear title and for you to do your due diligence, we would do an initial closing. In that initial closing, they would get a non-refundable equitable deposit. So it's essentially like our consideration deposit on that property. So that equitable deposit, they can use however they want. It's not like EMD that sits in escrow, they can't touch it. They could use it however they want. They can go buy a car with it. I don't care. But
their money.
Yeah, it's their money, but it's also our equitable deposit on the property. So then the title company then goes, and remember, this is the first 7 to 10 days. Title company goes and files an installment contract with the county. As they file that, it's fairly similar to like a lis pendens, right? So like they file that installment contract with the county. We now are listed on the title as having an equitable ownership on the title. Don't be confused. Like we don't get the title. The title's not in our name. We have equitable ownership on that title. Then after that,
because you put that deposit down.
We put the deposit down. Exactly. And then what happens from there? The seller actually signs the deed at that closing. So they sign that deed over. The title company holds that deed in escrow. And so then now I can go and do whatever I want on the B2C side. I can list it with an agent and then I sign all the documents. No need for a POA. I can wholesale it. We actually have done a bunch of these. I can actually flip the property and then sell it because I don't run the risk of them selling the property out from under me. Whereas like a novation, people would be like, I'm not going to put money into there because what if they end up being like, yo, I like what you've done to the place. I don't want to sell it anymore.
It's not great. Yeah.
So like they could always do that. But with an installment, they've already signed the deed. So literally what ends up happening is when I get my B2C signed, the title company will combine them and then record those deeds together. The great thing about that is that seller never comes back ever again to sign any other documents after that initial A to B. So they'll never see me making $100K. They'll never see what I made on it. They see what the initial settlement statement says is I'm paying you my $500 now. And then when we go and sell on the back end, you'll get the remaining balance that's owed to you. What's also really cool is this becomes extremely seller centric in that you could craft your offers just for them. So like I've done $500 down and then I've done $10,000 down. And then I've done, because I knew that was going to be an absolute banger. And then I've done, you could go, I'll give you $500 now. And then would it help if I covered your mortgage until we closed? Because what happens is when I do that, and then when I cover their mortgage until they close, it's credited back to me at closing. So it's not really even coming out of my pocket now. I get that money back. Or I go, I'll give you $500 a month until we close. Would that be helpful for you? And so then like my offer becomes significantly better than anybody else's offer because I'm putting money down. I'm giving them money monthly and then it comes back to me credited at the closing. So it's wild. It's a really cool method. And then one of my other favorite things to do is actually like, because this has IRS tax law, this has title insurance will cover this, lenders will cover this. You actually, once you get that equitable ownership, it actually starts your seasoning period. So you could do like rate and term refinances, 30-year refinances on these as soon as you get on that title. Or if you hold it long enough, you could do a cash out refinance without ever having to purchase. So like, let's say you want to flip a property, but you don't have the cash or you don't want to deal with like interest. You don't want to deal with paying the 15% down to originate the bridge loan. You don't want to have to do all that stuff. You can enter into an installment contract with somebody. And then if you have money out of pocket, you could flip with that money out of pocket or with a private lender and then sell on the MLS without ever having to buy the property in the first place. It's wild. So there's so many use cases that you could do on this, and even like a cash out, right? Like you could do all that cash out without ever having to buy the property. wild. So it's really cool. And so I've just, this is all I do, man. This is a safer way to do things. It protects us from what I call flight risks. We deal a lot with foreclosures. So you get a lot of people that are making really bad decisions historically. And then they'll go and they take your contract. You're in a contract with them. They're still trying to talk to other people and like sign contracts with other people. I've had somebody, we wired in funds and they signed with somebody else and closed with them. So this like locks that in because they sign away the title in the first 7 to 10 days when they want their money as soon as possible. And they've already signed it away, so they don't have to wait another 30 to 45 days to get their money. It's already done. And then I don't have to worry about them signing with anybody else because it's already done. So it's wild.